The Co-Care for Kids Face It movement is committed to preventing and ending child abuse in the Commonwealth so that every child can grow up healthy, safe, and joyful. Everyone has a role in that goal, including preachers, pediatricians, educators, parents, nonprofit professionals, early childhood providers, and so many other caring adults in our communities. That includes you. It's easy to think preventing and ending child abuse is someone else's job, but there are simple ways each of us can play a small or large part in keeping kids safe and strengthening families. We can all be the face that ends child abuse. Will you join the movement?
Recognizing and preventing child physical abuse and neglect as a community member in the 10-4 Faces P Bruising Rule.
My name is Dr. Melissa Curry. I'm a child abuse pediatrician, medical director, and chief of the Co-Care for Kids Division of Pediatric Forensic Medicine at the University of Louisville School of Medicine. Child maltreatment occurs in all ethnic, social, and economic groups. It can and does happen in families we perceive to be similar to our own. We all have biases, both implicit biases and explicit biases, meaning those we recognize consciously and those we don't know about consciously. It's important for us to learn what our biases are so that we can combat them. I recommend the free online Harvard Implicit Association tests. They help us identify our implicit biases so that we can do cognitive workarounds to prevent our biases from impacting our judgment when it comes to child maltreatment. It is very, very rare for a child to be seriously injured or killed the very first time they are abused or neglected. This tends to be an escalation of violence over time, and that's why it's so important for all of us who care for children to notice those early warning signs so that we can stop that violence before it escalates. All of us are in unique positions to recognize and intervene on behalf of children. Some risk factors for child maltreatment include children who are very young, birth to 4 years old, having substance exposure at birth, premature infants, babies with prolonged stays in their birth hospital, physical, emotional, behavioral, or developmental disabilities, or chronic illness. From a caregiver perspective, risk factors include substance use disorder, untreated, undiagnosed, or unstable mental illness, criminal history, intimate partner or family violence, low self-esteem, poor impulse control, caregivers who themselves were abused or neglected as children, immature parents with poor coping skills, and caregivers who have unrealistic expectations for a child for their given developmental level. This last point is one of the most common threads that we see running through the cases of physical abuse and neglect that we see in our program. From a family perspective, risk factors can include family violence, isolation, and that can include geographical isolation or social isolation or both, poverty or limited resources, unemployment, financial stressors, single parents, and families in which animals are also abused. There are a number of known triggering situations for physical abuse, but by far the most common number one trigger for physical abuse, and particularly abusive head trauma, is crying in an infant. The second most common trigger for physical abuse is toilet training accidents in older children. Other triggers include feeding issues or frustration with a baby who's not taking a bottle, a child's perceived misbehavior, punishment that has gotten out of control, arguments or family conflict, and really anything outside the family that is causing stress for the caregiver, such as job loss, death of a loved one, or legal or relationship problems. The definition for physical abuse is the injury by other than accidental means of a child under 18 years of age, which is the result of actions via parent, guardian, or other designated caretaker. Physical abuse can include hitting, kicking, biting, harmful restraint, including strangulation, beating, use of a weapon or instrument, or any actions resulting in substantial pain and suffering. As a child abuse pediatrician, I'm often asked about physical punishment or spanking. It is legal in all 50 states for parents and caregivers to administer physical punishment to children. However, it is not legal for them to injure the child in the process. So if physical punishment results in bruising, then injury has occurred. This then takes us out of the realm of legal spanking and into the category of child physical abuse. Speaking of injuries, bruising is the most commonly missed early warning sign of abuse, but it is also the most easily recognizable if we know what to look for. That's why it's so important for us to recognize what kinds of bruises are high risk. Please note that some of the following photographs are graphic and disturbing as they depict injuries in young children. Please do what you need to do to take care of yourself, including looking away or pausing the video. The 10-4 Faces P bruising rule helps us determine what bruises in children are high risk for abuse and require a call to Child Protective Services and additional evaluation. Let's go through the rule. T is for torso. Here are some examples of torso bruises. The torso, or trunk, includes the chest, abdomen, back, buttocks, and genital area. Any bruising to these areas in a young child is high risk. E stands for ears. Here are some examples of ear bruising. Any part of the ear can be bruised, and the bruises can be very small to very large. It is unusual for a child to sustain an ear bruise accidentally. N stands for neck. Here is an example of a neck bruise. Again, this is a very rare area for children to sustain accidental injury. The 4 is referring to any child 4 years of age or younger, or any bruise anywhere on a baby who is 4.9 months or younger. The rule of thumb is that those who don't cruise rarely bruise, and cruising is the developmental stage where children are pulling up on furniture and starting to take steps. Once children start cruising, they begin to earn their accidental bruises. Remember, bruising in babies isn't normal. Now let's go through the Faces P part of the rule. F is for frenulum, A is for angle of the jaw, C is for cheeks, specifically the soft, fleshy part of the facial cheeks. E is for eyelids, S is for subconjunctiva, that's the white part of the eye. And finally, P stands for patterned bruising. A patterned bruise is one that leaves behind the shape of the object used to inflict the bruise. Let's go through some examples of Faces P bruising. Here are some examples of frenulum injuries. The frenulum is that small piece of tissue behind our upper lip, our lower lip, and under the tongue. Any of the frenula can be injured with abuse. These are examples of angle of the jaw bruises. We see these often in children who are victims of abusive head trauma, but we also see them in other forms of physical abuse as well. Here are some examples of soft portion of the cheek bruises. And these photos show us examples of eyelid bruising. That's the E in Faces P. And here are some examples of subconjunctival hemorrhages, which are spots of bleeding in the white part of the eye. Finally, pattern bruising can involve any bruise which has a shape that indicates the object that caused it. The most common patterned injuries from abuse are slap marks, loop marks, and human bite marks. Inflicted slap marks often look stripe-like. They can occur anywhere on the body, but the facial cheeks and the buttocks are the most common locations. Loop marks are U-shaped, curved bruises that depict the shape of a thin, flexible object that can wrap around and conform to the contours or curves of the body. And here are some examples of inflicted adult bite marks. It is indeed disturbing that some adults bite children, especially that they bite hard enough to leave behind bruising. Bite marks often look like circles or like parentheses. We really worry about children with inflicted adult bite marks, as these are often associated with more sadistic abusers. Now, moving on from 10-4 Faces P, I'm often asked what normal accidental bruises look like. We know that healthy, active, mobile children often fall or bump into things to get accidental bruises. Normal accidental bruises in toddlers and older children who are cruising are typically on the front of the body and over bony prominences. A bony prominence is an area with skin over bone without a lot of padding in between. So that includes the forehead, elbows, knees, and shins, especially the knees and shins. When it comes to deciding whether to be concerned, it's helpful to use objective findings. That's why the 10-4 faces P rule is so helpful. Let's talk a bit about bias, which can affect our ability to be objective. There's research that shows that there are certain groups of people we're more likely to overlook when it comes to child maltreatment, especially physical abuse. That includes white families, those that are considered to be quote-unquote intact, meaning the mother and father are living together in the home with the child, middle-class, well-educated families, and essentially families we perceive to be similar to our own. In other words, we tend to give the benefit of the doubt to families we perceive to be like us, and we are more suspicious of families we perceive to be not like us. This occurs because of implicit or subconscious biases that we all have as human beings. That is why it is so important to uncover our implicit biases so that we can work around them. We're now going to talk a bit about child neglect. Neglect is the most prevalent and deadly form of child maltreatment. The definition of child neglect is any act of omission or failure to meet the needs of a child, including clothing, education, food, emotional needs, medical attention, safety, shelter, sleep, and supervision. Here in Kentucky, there is statutory language that says that the above issues cannot be due to poverty alone, which is very important. Some categories of neglect include medical neglect, unsafe sleep with an impaired caregiver, educational neglect, nutritional neglect, emotional neglect, which is a form of psychological maltreatment, environmental neglect, and supervisional neglect. Some indicators of neglect in children include poor weight gain in babies and young children, children who are falling asleep at school or having poor school attendance, falling grades or behavior changes, chronic hunger or tiredness, begging or stealing food from other children or rummaging, extremely poor hygiene, and inadequate clothing for the weather conditions. Now let's talk about prevention. When it comes to prevention of abuse, since crying is the #1 trigger for physical abuse and abusive head trauma, and since unrealistic expectations for children is a common thread among many abuse cases, education about infant crying and normal development is one of the most powerful things that we can do to help families and caregivers to have the skills and the knowledge that they need to avoid child maltreatment. We can remind folks that crying is normal in babies, and we can provide specific tools for soothing a crying infant. Perhaps more importantly, we can include permission to place the baby in a safe place and walk away and take a break. We can also help parents and caregivers have reasonable expectations for a child for their given developmental level by teaching about normal developmental milestones. Finally, secondary prevention occurs when we recognize the early signs of abuse, and that includes 10-4 faces P bruising rule. Remember that abuse is rarely a one-time event. It tends to escalate over time, and because of that, there are early warning signs that we all need to learn to recognize. Remember that bruising in babies is not normal. Finally, we can prevent abuse and neglect by promoting healthy relationships and healthy caregivers. This includes educating parents about choosing appropriate caregivers for their babies and young children, educating young people about safe and healthy intimate relationships and the risks of drug and alcohol use or abuse, and ensuring access to mental health and substance use assessment and treatment for all caregivers. We can become a resource for parents and caregivers and help connect families to support services. Offer to babysit, take them a meal, or give them an extra set of hands in the grocery store. Even a sympathetic smile with, "I remember when my child was this age, it can be hard. Is there anything I can do for you to be helpful?" We can also have difficult conversations with parents and caregivers if we have concerns about how the child is being treated. We can talk to parents about choosing safe caregivers, and we can talk openly with everyone we know about the dangers of shaking a baby or child. Let's transition now to resilience. Resilience is a dynamic, meaning it changes over time, process of positive adaptation despite significant adversities. In other words, it's the process of thriving and overcoming hard times. It is a developmental process that we all can foster in children and young adults through supportive relationships and by teaching healthy coping mechanisms. Resilience significantly impacts mental health outcomes in survivors by lessening the negative effects of trauma and promoting adaptive functioning, such as healthy coping skills. Characteristics of resilient children and young adults include the skills, motivation, and opportunity to build healthy interpersonal connections, the ability to draw on spiritual beliefs, reframing the abuse, external attribution of blame, meaning instead of blaming oneself, a resilient survivor blames the person or persons responsible for the abuse, reclaiming one's self-worth, taking control of one's life, and pursuing meaningful goals. The American Academy of Pediatrics recognizes that resilience comes from reliable support from attachment figures that help a child with cognitive development, learning self-regulation, developing hope, self-efficacy, and creating a network of supportive relationships. Protective factors for resilience include higher educational attainment among the caregivers and the child, interpersonal and emotional confidence, optimism, and social attachments and support. There are a number of resilience-building interventions that are evidence-based. Two of these include trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which shows large improvements in symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, and anxiety. There is also an intervention called mindfulness-based stress reduction, which also has been shown to decrease depression, anxiety, and PTSD symptoms. It also improves self-compassion and psychological health. In summary, we are all in unique positions to help keep children safe by recognizing early signs of abuse and neglect, especially the 10-4 faces P bruising rule, by supporting and educating parents and caregivers about infant crying and normal child development, and by promoting safe and healthy relationships and caregivers. Even when abuse and neglect happens, children have great potential to be resilient, and we can promote resilience in children by being safe, stable, and nurturing adults in their lives.
Recognizing and preventing child sexual abuse as a community member.
My name is Caroline Rochelle, CEO of Children's Advocacy Centers of Kentucky. Child sexual abuse is defined as an act that is sexual in nature that involves a minor child. That can be contact or non-contact acts meant for sexual gratification, either in the moment or at a later time. It is also an act in which there is a power differential between the child victim and the adult or peer offender. Child human trafficking cases may involve commercial sexual activity. Human trafficking will be addressed in its own chapter. Current research indicates that 1 in 10 children experience sexual abuse, although some estimates are as high as 1 in 4. While child sexual abuse is common and is not limited by race, gender, or socioeconomic status, girls are at a greater risk. Most children do not disclose child sexual abuse until adulthood, and many may never disclose. Most offenders of child sexual abuse are known to the child and/or family. Most acts of child sexual abuse occur in isolated, one-on-one settings. Additional child risk factors include a lack of parental supervision and emotional support, low self-esteem and loneliness, behavioral problems, and abuse or neglect occurring within the home. The good news is that there are protective factors that families can implement to aid in prevention. These include Parents and other caregivers should have open lines of communication and be emotionally supportive of the child. That can include explaining that while surprises are okay because those are time limited and make people happy, there should be no secrets. Talking to kids about body safety and boundaries in an age-appropriate way, teaching children the correct terms for their private parts, and talking to kids about digital and online safety. More on that in its own chapter. Limiting isolated one-on-one contact with adults and older peers can also help lower the risk for sexual abuse, especially ensuring that youth-serving organizations, including schools and community-based programs, use background checks, screening, and policies and practices limiting isolated one-on-one contact. This can go a long way to keep kids safe. Offenders of sexual abuse may select a victim and then engage in grooming behavior before the abuse occurs. Grooming behaviors allow the offender to gain access to and isolate the minor, develop trust with the minor and often their guardians, community, and youth-serving institutions, and desensitize the minor to sexual content and physical contact. After abuse, the offender may use strategies to facilitate future sexual abuse and/or prevent disclosure. It is often difficult to detect sexual grooming because some grooming behaviors resemble normal adult-child interactions. To prevent child sexual abuse, it is vital to identify sexual grooming behaviors that can be considered red flag behaviors. Red flag grooming behaviors include engaging in activities alone without other adults or children present, physical boundary violations like touching the child anywhere other than on top of his or her head, discussion of sexual topics, non-family and community members engaging in sleepovers, giving child rewards or privileges, childlike behavior like using non-age appropriate slang to gain rapport with the child, offering free transportation for the child, or offering one-on-one time with the child for a seemingly well-intended purpose like tutoring or coaching. Children often show no overt signs of sexual abuse. Signs can be present, but can also look like signs of child stress, distress, or other trauma. Emotional and behavioral signs or changes in a child are more common than physical signs. These can include anxiety and/or depression, sleep disturbances, changes in eating habits, unusual fear of certain people or places, reluctance to be alone with a certain person, changes in mood that can include anger, aggressiveness towards parents, siblings, friends, and pets, rebellion or withdrawal, runaway behavior, changes in attitude towards school or academic performance, lack of interest in friends, sports, or other activities, unexplained or frequent health problems like headaches or stomach aches, poor self-esteem and avoidance of relationships, self-mutilation or change in body perception, like thinking of self or body as dirty or bad, and having suicidal thoughts, regression to previously outgrown behaviors, for example, bedwetting or thumb sucking, abnormal sexual behaviors or knowledge of advanced sexual language and behaviors, too perfect behavior or overly compliant behavior. Direct physical signs of sexual abuse are not common. However, when physical signs are present, they may include bruising, bleeding, redness and bumps, or scabs around the mouth, genital or anus, urinary tract infections, sexually transmitted diseases, and abnormal vaginal or penile discharge are also warning signs. These signs are not always enough by themselves to make a report of abuse, but they should prompt you to express concern to the child and their medical provider. Let the child know you notice something and that you are there for them. If a child does disclose abuse, be a source of support. The child needs you to be the adult, to be in control, and to provide safety. Manage your own emotions and do not overreact or underreact. Be aware of what your tone of voice, body posture, and expressions may be communicating. How you respond will influence what the child chooses to tell other people about the situation. Research shows that having a supportive adult who believes them is one of the most powerful predictors of resilience in children who have been sexually abused. Allow the child to share at his or her own pace, using his or her own language. Do not press the child for details. Do not make remarks that question the child's experience or even confirm the experience. Just let the story unfold. Use your own experience to help you understand what the child may be feeling, such as fear, helplessness, shame, or guilt. It is okay to ask feeling-oriented questions that allow the child to share their experience safely without asking specific questions about details. Assure the child that their feelings are okay. Most importantly, assure the child this is not their fault and that you believe them. Thank the child for telling you and reassure him or her of your support. Do not promise to keep something just between you and the child. Do not ask for additional details about who, what, where, when, how. That is the job of the investigators. Do not try to sort out what is true or make discounting statements such as, "Are you sure you did not misunderstand? He or she would not have done that. You were wrong. That isn't that bad." Or, "It could have been worse." Your job is simply to listen to the child. Because of the complex dynamics involved, Kentucky requires the joint investigation and multidisciplinary response to child sexual abuse. Children's advocacy centers coordinate this response and provide direct services, including forensic interviewing, victim advocacy, medical and mental health services. Support can be immediate or longer term. Trauma-informed mental health treatment can be an important part of healing. Kentucky's statute allows school personnel to provide age-appropriate instruction on child sexual abuse through curriculum or programs in accordance with the standards set forth by the National Children's Alliance and approved by the Children's Advocacy Centers of Kentucky, regardless of grade level. These programs can lead to disclosures of abuse. If a disclosure is made, remember the importance of your response. Adults can take steps to prevent child sexual abuse and to protect children from further abuse when it has happened. Trauma-informed mental health care is effective, and with a multidisciplinary team response and support, children can heal and thrive.
Recognizing and reporting child psychological maltreatment as a community member.
My name is Dr. Melissa Curry. I'm a child abuse pediatrician, medical director, and chief of the COSAIR for Kids Division of Pediatric Forensic Medicine at University of Louisville School of Medicine. Psychological maltreatment is likely the most common form of maltreatment, as it exists in isolation and in combination with other forms of maltreatment. Psychological maltreatment is likely the most underreported form of maltreatment as well. Let's start by going through some terms for psychological maltreatment. I will primarily use that term in this presentation as it encompasses both emotional abuse and emotional neglect. Psychological maltreatment was legally introduced as a form of child maltreatment in the 1974 Child Abuse Prevention and Treatment Act, or CAPTA, with the term mental injury. In the 2010 version of CAPTA, they use the term emotional harm, but provide no further definition. Reviews of state statutes find a lack of consistent definition of psychological maltreatment, and tremendous variations exist across states in rates of reported psychological maltreatment. In Kentucky statute, emotional injury means an injury to the mental or psychological capacity or emotional stability of a child, as evidenced by a substantial and observable impairment in the child's ability to function within a normal range of performance and behavior with due regard to his or her age, development, culture, and environment, as testified to by a qualified mental health professional. Kentucky defines an emotionally abused or emotionally neglected child as one whose health or welfare is harmed or threatened with harm when his or her parent, guardian, or other person exercising custodial control or supervision inflicts or allows to be inflicted an emotional injury or creates or allows to be created a risk of emotional injury upon the child. Psychological maltreatment can be a repeated pattern of caregiver behavior or an extreme incident that conveys to a child that they are worthless, flawed, unloved, unwanted, endangered, or only of value in meeting another's needs. The emotionally abusive acts can be grouped into the categories of spurning, terrorizing, exploiting or corrupting, isolating, and denying emotional responsiveness. It's important to understand that from a definition perspective, intent to harm may or may not accompany the behaviors in the caregiver. Currently in Kentucky, there is a standard that the child has to have been harmed in a demonstrable way. In other words, the maltreatment must have negatively affected the child's cognitive, social, emotional, and/or physical development. This unfortunately places resilient children at a disadvantage when it comes to having their psychological maltreatment identified from a legal perspective. From a child abuse pediatrics perspective, psychological maltreatment can be diagnosed based solely on the caregiver behavior, not on the effects of the child. Based upon the statutory definition of emotional injury, if a qualified mental health professional testifies that a child has been emotionally injured or is at risk of emotional injury will or should be substantiated. For a report of emotional abuse to be substantiated in Kentucky, the Department of Community-Based Services, which is what we call CPS here in Kentucky, and community health professionals must work collaboratively. It is the role of DCBS to investigate the report and determine a perpetrator and to submit a formal request for an emotional injury assessment through a qualified mental health professional. An objective qualified mental health professional then determines whether the child has an emotional injury or there is a risk of emotional injury to the child as defined in Kentucky Revised Statute. There are 5 primary areas of harm from psychological maltreatment, and they can, without appropriate mental health treatment, affect a child for a lifetime. These include problems of intrapersonal thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, emotional problems and symptoms, social competency problems and antisocial functioning, and this can include attachment issues, learning and behavior problems, physical health problems or adverse biological changes, such as those described when discussing the Adverse Childhood Experiences or ACEs studies. That said, there are evidence-based therapies designed to help children and adults overcome and bounce back from the negative effects of psychological maltreatment. Children, in particular, can be unbelievably resilient when they are allowed the opportunity to form secure attachments to safe and loving caregivers and receive therapy to process their experiences. By recognizing and reporting psychological maltreatment in children, we can do our part to keep the children in our community safe and to promote their ability to thrive throughout their lifetime.
Recognizing and preventing abuse and neglect of children with special needs.
My name is Dr. Melissa Curry. I'm a child abuse pediatrician, medical director-in-chief of the COSAIR for Kids Division of Pediatric Forensic Medicine at University of Louisville School of Medicine. Children with special healthcare needs are at increased risk for abuse and neglect. They have inherently more challenging, complex, or time-consuming needs than peers without special healthcare needs. Also, if there is impairment in their ability to communicate, this diminishes their routes of self-protection through disclosure of abuse or neglect. Special healthcare needs can include physical health issues, mental or behavioral health issues, cognitive delays or emotional disabilities, or a combination of all of these. A special consideration for children who are not independently mobile, meaning they are dependent on others for movement from one place to another, is that they may not be sufficiently mobile to sustain typical accidental wear and tear bruises as we might expect in a similarly aged peer. For example, in a typically developing 4-year-old child, several small bruises along each shin can be completely normal. However, in a 4-year-old who is able to roll, but is not sitting or crawling or pulling to stand, those same bruises may become much more worrisome. Medical neglect is more common among children with special healthcare needs. Such children often need to see multiple medical providers, they may be on multiple medications, and they may require therapy such as occupational therapy, speech therapy, or physical therapy. Durable medical equipment may also be needed, such as braces, wheelchairs, walkers, and specialized car seats. If children are coming to our attention without needed medications, medical equipment, or nutrition, or if we are aware that they are not receiving the therapies as prescribed, this may justify a report to Child Protective Services for possible medical neglect. Another key area of focus for this population is discipline. Children with developmental or cognitive delays, special emotional needs, or psychiatric diagnoses may have challenging behaviors. It is critical that adults caring for children have realistic developmental expectations for children. If a caregiver mistakenly believes a child should be capable of something they are not actually capable of, this can lead to increased stress, which can lead to inappropriate discipline or even escalate to physical or psychological maltreatment. This is particularly pertinent when it involves children with behavioral disabilities who demonstrate aggressive or defiant behaviors. This places significant stress on families, and when discipline is involved, can be very difficult to navigate. This is one of many reasons to avoid physical punishment in children, as physical punishment in these stressful settings can escalate and become more and more dangerous to the child. As adults who care for children, we can help prevent abuse and neglect in children with special healthcare needs by offering support to a caregiver, whether it's a meal, an offer of childcare, or even just a listening ear. Sympathetic words and a kind smile can go a long way, such as, "You look like you might have your hands full. Could I assist you in some way?" In addition to being a support to caregivers, it is also important that we make reports to Child Protective Services if we have reasonable cause to believe a child is being abused or neglected. By alerting the proper authorities, we can positively impact a child's short and long-term outcomes.
Recognizing and reporting human trafficking as a community member.
My name is Marissa Castellanos. I'm the founder and director of The Coterie. Human trafficking exploits children and is happening in Kentucky communities every day. Children are trafficked for sex and for labor. Sex trafficking is any sexual act exchanged for something of value, which is induced by the use of control or in which the victim is under the age of 18. The commercial exchange could be for any item of value, such as food, money, drugs, a bus ticket, or medication. Anyone under the age of 18 involved in a commercial sex act is automatically considered a victim of sex trafficking, regardless of the presence of control. A child cannot consent to engage in commercial sex acts because of their age. Labor trafficking is when a child is forced or compelled to work and is being controlled through abuse, deception, or threats of harm. Often, a real or imagined debt is involved, and there is little or no pay for the work. Labor trafficking occurs in many formal labor sectors, such as agriculture, domestic work, and restaurants, as well as informal labor, such as panhandling, begging, door-to-door sales, recreation, and illicit activities, such as selling drugs or shoplifting. Anyone can be a trafficker, such as a dating partner, a peer, an adult acquaintance, an employer, a family member, or a caregiver. A significant vulnerability for children is their age and the dependence that they have on adults to provide for their basic needs. Children of all ages and genders are trafficked. Some children are particularly vulnerable to trafficking due to systems and society, such as those involved in the child welfare or juvenile justice systems, recent arrivals to the United States, such as immigrants and refugees, children with physical or developmental disabilities, children who are experiencing housing instability or food insecurity, and children who identify as LGBTQ. Youth who are missing from care, who may have run away, are particularly vulnerable. They may have challenges meeting their basic needs and may have more high-risk encounters where exploitation may occur. Familial trafficking is when a family member or guardian is involved, They see the trafficking as an economic benefit for money, a way to pay the bills or debts, for drugs, or as a way to obtain luxury items. In familial trafficking, female caregivers are often involved in the facilitation of the trafficking. The University of Kentucky Center on Trauma and Children provides some of the leading research on familial trafficking in the country and is an excellent resource for additional information. Traffickers may target children with existing substance use issues. Traffickers may also use substance addiction to keep a child in a trafficking situation. It can be framed as a reward or punishment, or as a way to decrease the child's ability to resist trafficking and abuse. Identifying human trafficking begins with awareness. It is critical that professionals working with children are trained on human trafficking. There may be behavioral, social, or environmental indicators related to trafficking victimization. Lists of red flags may limit identification or reinforce bias. However, validated screening tools are an important resource to identify human trafficking. Organizations should have a process to provide screening through either internal clinicians or referrals to community partners. Language access is incredibly important, so the use of interpreters is essential. Reasonable suspicion of human trafficking involving a child requires that a report be made to DCBS. Whether the perpetrator is a caretaker or non-caretaker, DCBS has internal policies and procedures to respond to these reports. There are specialized service providers in Kentucky to support children who have experienced human trafficking. DCBS has partnerships with many specialized providers. It is possible to prevent human trafficking by increasing protective factors and reducing risk factors for children. One of the most important protective factors for children is the presence of a supportive adult in their lives. Talking to children in age-appropriate ways about consent, safety, and their rights as workers is critical, and these should be ongoing conversations over time. Safe engagement with technology can reduce risk substantially and can be as simple as knowing how to block someone online, ensuring default settings on devices are adjusted to increase privacy and security, and knowing how to report inappropriate or unsafe online behaviors. Participation in a prevention education curriculum can provide opportunities for skill building, such as developing a safety plan and role-playing risky scenarios. Human trafficking prevention education is available in Kentucky for school settings, residential facilities, or community-based organizations. Human trafficking is not inevitable. Together, we can ensure Kentucky communities are safe havens for children, not for traffickers.
Reporting child abuse and neglect as a mandated reporter.
My name is Dr. Melissa Curry. I'm a child abuse pediatrician, medical director, and chief of the COSAIR for Kids Division of Pediatric Forensic Medicine at University of Louisville School of Medicine. When it comes to reporting in Kentucky, any person who has reasonable cause to believe that child maltreatment has occurred is required by law to report. Reports can be made to Child Protective Services, law enforcement, the Commonwealth's attorney, or county attorney. It is best to make the report to Child Protective Services unless it's an immediate safety issue, because they have the infrastructure in place to determine acceptance criteria and respond to reports across the state. The Department for Community-Based Services, or DCBS, is the name of Child Protective Services here in Kentucky. We may also sometimes hear them referred to as the Cabinet. Kentucky Revised Statute states that there is a legal protection for reporting sources. It states that anyone acting upon reasonable cause to make a report has good faith immunity from liability, civil, or criminal charges. This also covers if court action results from the report. When we report, while we're allowed to do so anonymously, it helps Child Protective Services if we give our name and occupation so that they can follow up with us and ask questions about the investigation. It also helps lend credibility to our report when we are able to identify ourselves as professionals who work with children. When we call, we should be prepared to tell them the child's name, if we know it, their address, where they can find the child right now, and then the specifics about what we saw that made us concerned that maltreatment was occurring. If we are very worried about a child and have concerns about the child's life being in danger, we need to say so. It can also be helpful to give them any information you might have about younger siblings in the home who may also be at risk, if we have any knowledge of weapons in the area, aggressive animals, or drug manufacture, and any other immediate safety concerns. Questions that we will be asked when making a report to DCBS include: what is your name in relationship to the child or situation? What happened? Provide specific information regarding concerns and extent of the abuse or neglect. What is the current location of the child? What is the condition of the child? And do we have any knowledge of previous child abuse or neglect issues? And what information do we have regarding the perpetrator, such as their name or relationship to the child, or their whereabouts? Keep the information factual and objective. Avoid making assumptions about the situation. For example, instead of saying, "Mother came to pick the child up and she's drunk," we could say, "Mother came to pick up the child and she is slurring her words, is unable to stand unassisted, and she has a strong odor of alcohol." This keeps the information objective without us drawing any conclusions. Finally, before ending the call, ask the intake worker to read back to you the concerns they have documented. Make sure all of your concerns were included, are accurate, and that your degree of concern is appropriately reflected. If there needs to be additions or corrections, make those prior to ending the call. In summary, we are all mandatory reporters in Kentucky if we have a reasonable cause to believe abuse or neglect has occurred. We are allowed to make reports anonymously, but it can be helpful to investigators if we identify ourselves and our relationship to the child. Be specific about our concerns and provide as much information as possible to the intake worker. And finally, keep our observations factual and objective. By doing these things, we can help keep children in Kentucky safe from child maltreatment.
Preventing child abuse by building safe environments for kids.
I'm Dr. Christina Howard, Medical Director of Kentucky Children's COSAFE for Kids Center for Safe and Healthy Children and Families. Many adults don't recognize some of the dangers in their environment, but especially may not be aware of how dangerous these things can be when there are children in the home. Creating safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments is essential for helping children and families thrive. That can look like a child being free from fear and secure from physical or psychological harm within their social and physical environment. Having a degree of predictability and consistency in a child's social, emotional, and physical environment. And the environment is nurturing to the extent in which a child's physical, emotional, and developmental needs are met. Everyone has a role to play in preventing child abuse and neglect and helping all children reach their full potential. Promoting safe environments in which our children grow includes safely storing any medications, other substances, and firearms in the home, as well as implementing safe sleep practices for babies and identifying safe caregivers to support child rearing. How and where you keep your medications can make a big difference when it comes to child safety. Unintentional medication overdoses are the leading cause of emergency department visits in young children. Every 9 minutes, a young child goes to the emergency department because they got into medicine. Adults can take steps to prevent unintentional overdoses in young children. Keep all medications up and out of reach of children, including children that can climb. It's best to keep up and away in a locked container or medication safe. Recognize that child-resistant containers do not equal child-proof. Know what is in the house, including medications that may come into the house with visitors. Know how to access the Poison Control Center and keep it handy either in your phone or posted on the refrigerator. In the U.S., firearms are the leading cause of death for children and teens aged 1 to 19, overtaking motor vehicle accidents in recent years. Adults can take steps to promote several firearm safety tips and to prevent tragedies. Never leave a child of any age alone with a gun. Talk to children about gun safety. Safely store the unloaded firearms out of sight and out of reach in the home by using safe storage devices and gun locks. Contact the 988 crisis line if you feel your child is in mental distress or needs support. If your children or child want to use firearms for hunting or sport, seek proper safety training courses. And ask all adults whose home your child enters if their home or surroundings contain guns and if they adhere to safe storage practices. Unintentional suffocation is the leading cause of injury-related death among children under 1 year of age. Top tips for sleep safety include: place babies on their backs for naps and at night until they are 1 year of age. Make sure they sleep on a firm, flat surface in their own crib, bassinet, or play yard. Choose a firm mattress and fitted sheet for baby's crib. Remove toys, blankets, pillows, bumper pads, and other accessories from the crib. Follow the manufacturer's instructions to assemble your crib, and then dress a baby in a wearable blanket, onesie, or similar clothing for every sleep, because a loose blanket could cover a baby's airway or make the body temperature too high. And just remember that it is best to share your room, but not your bed. One of the hardest decisions can be who else you allow to care for your children. Before hiring a caregiver, whether that's an in-home babysitter or at a child care program in your community, here are some tips to ensure your child's safety is the top priority. Check the reputation of the caregiver by getting at least 2 references from the caregiver, and then follow up with those references. Make sure staff and volunteers at the daycare facility or school have been trained to take care of children. Ensure potential caregivers receive background checks for any child abuse and criminal activities. Observe how the caregiver interacts with your child and other children. Do they raise their voice, or do they easily connect with the children? At child care facilities, ask what activities are available for your child throughout the day. Tour the building inside and out. Check to see if the facility has Parents Advisory Board, as well as how they handle parental concern or complaints. Keeping kids safe is an adult responsibility, beginning inside the home. Practicing these safety tips will build a more nurturing and supportive environment in which our little ones can grow up.
Keeping kids safe online.
Hi, I'm Sonia Gray, the Executive Director of ECHO, Exploited Children's Help Organization. The Internet offers endless opportunities for learning and connection. However, there are many hidden dangers when kids access the Internet. Parents, educators, health providers, and other caring adults have a role in ensuring children and teens understand the risks, know how to prevent unsafe situations, and know what to do if they encounter a situation that makes them uncomfortable. Most importantly, we must all commit to being safe adults. A safe adult is someone kids can count on when they feel unsafe, unsure, or need support. Technology has changed the way kids learn. When used wisely, it can improve a child's education and other facets of life. But too much exposure might have negative effects. Here are a few definitions that safe adults should be aware of as kids learn and socialize in the digital world. Cyberbullying is the use of electronic communication to bully a person, typically by sending messages of an intimidating or threatening nature. Sexting is the action or practice of sending sexually explicit photographs or messages via mobile phone. Grooming is manipulative behaviors that potential abusers use to gain access to potential victims, coerce them to agree to abuse, and reduce the risk of being caught. Sextortion is a growing form of child exploitation where predators use online threats to manipulate youth into sending explicit images, then demand more content or money. Child abuse is 100% preventable. Recent legislation in Kentucky empowers victims of sexual extortion by defining it as a felony or misdemeanor based on severity and recognizing it as a sex crime. The law also requires schools to educate students and parents about the risk of sexual extortion, prioritizing prevention and awareness. Sextortion is more common than you think. While girls are still targeted, predators now often focus on teen boys aged 15 through 17, sometimes as young as 9. The shift from sexual to financial motives has made this crime even more dangerous, and in some cases, it has led to youth suicide. Here are a few tips for parents and caregivers to keep kids safe while in digital spaces. Tip 1 is open communication. It's never too early or too late to start a dialogue with your child about staying safe online. Open communication about safely navigating the internet, social media, and gaming sites, and being honest about potential online dangers can help ensure they will come to you if they are ever in a situation that is uncomfortable or scary. Tip 2 is set boundaries. Digital parenting is about supporting your children to reap the benefits of having technology in their lives. But it's also vital that we guide our young ones through the potential downside of life online and help them adopt healthy digital boundaries. One of the first boundaries you'll likely consider when it comes to allowing your kids access to digital devices is the types of content they can view. Talk to younger children about what is appropriate versus not appropriate content and never giving out personal information. Talk to older children about sexting, cyberbullying, and sextortion. A few examples of what digital boundaries can include are: create clear rules on accessing the internet, such as time of day and in public parts of your home. Consider only allowing usage of devices in an open family area, so it is easier to supervise what they are doing and who they are connecting with. On top of this, you could set a boundary about preventing them from taking their devices to their rooms. And this can help to limit both unsupervised use and when they're racking up the screen time. Implementing age-appropriate content restrictions and using parental controls are great tools when it comes to creating a safer online environment for your kids. Finally, deciding on which platforms your kids can use, what privacy settings or age restrictions they can and can't have, and who they're able to interact with, and whether they're allowed to use them while unsupervised are all crucial boundaries to consider. Tip 3 is to utilize parental controls. These tools can help set screen time limits, block inappropriate content, and monitor online activity, allowing parents to establish healthy digital habits and digital boundaries. Just a few parental control platforms, including Bark and Life360, and each can give you valuable intel on your child's online activity. In an ever-evolving online world, sometimes it's difficult to make sense of the huge selection of apps and games available to young minds. The choices are almost endless, and it's not always possible to know which apps are age-appropriate, which games are safe to play, and just what content your child is being exposed to. With social media's ever-growing popularity among children and young people, it's important for adults to keep themselves apprised of the associated risk and help young people to navigate these platforms in a safe, responsible manner. However, it can be difficult to know exactly how to protect children and young people while they use these apps. There are a number of resources for parents, caregivers, educators, and youth-serving organizations to utilize to promote digital safety among children and teens, including Common Sense Media, Digital Parenting Coach, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and NetSmarts. The Cyber Tip Line is an important resource for reporting any online child sexual exploitation. Find these resources and more at facetabuse.org/cybersafety.
Supporting parents and caregivers.
My name is Dr. Darlene Davis Goodwine, the founder of Parent Zone and lead researcher of the POURS Lab. That's the Parenting Outcome, Recovery, Resilience, Engagement, and Support Lab at Kentucky State University. I serve Kentucky's parents, caregivers, and community members as a parenting coach, parent advocate, and youth mental health advocate. Parenting is one of the hardest and most important jobs in the world. But for parents and caregivers, navigating challenges is even more complex. Whether you're a parent with a mental health challenge, raising a child with behavioral health challenges, a birth parent working towards reunification, or a grandparent raising your grandchild, and even a foster parent opening your home and heart, you're carrying a tremendous responsibility. We know that to truly put kids first, we must support those who care for them. It is important that we center parents and caregivers as individuals who are worthy of support, people who are capable of learning through coaching, healing through emotional support, if necessary, and growing forward when given the resources to thrive. Why does parenting and caregiver coaching and support matter, you ask? Because parents and caregivers are on the front lines of the youth mental health crises, alongside educators, providers, and community members. Parenting support is necessary, yet parents and caregivers often feel isolated, overwhelmed, and sometimes unheard. They're facing trauma, poverty, complex systems, and stigma, and often without a strong support system. The road to raising productive adults, obtaining reunification with their children, or simply obtaining family stability can feel impossible. Offering parenting and caregiver support changes that by providing real-time parenting tools and encouraging practices that support youth mental health, youth emotional health, communication strategies, and behavioral and disciplinary guidance. Understand that every parent and caregiver has the capacity to grow when they are supported, equipped, and empowered. That support must also extend to kinship caregivers, the grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, who step up for family with love, but often without the resources they need. And to foster parents, who do more than just provide shelter. They are a part of a child's healing journey, and ideally are a part of a broader support network that includes the birth family. Parenting support not only prevents breakdowns in care, it also builds bridges to healing, growth, and lasting stability. We're saying that every family, the child and the parent and caregiver, matters. That can look like offering a parent with a squirming toddler a helping hand in the grocery store. It can look like building a connection with a family to serve as a mentor for their teen, or to provide respite for the parents who just welcomed home a new baby. It can also look like talking openly about parenting stress without judgment, to empathize with those experiences that parents share and maybe share resources of support. Providing a listening ear and asking a parent or caregiver what they need to feel supported provides the opportunity for them to ask for help. Because here's what we know. When we support parents and caregivers, we protect youth. When we equip parents and caregivers, we stabilize homes. And when we empower families, we transform communities. Let's commit to a Kentucky where every parent and caregiver feels supported, every parent and caregiver feels seen, and every youth has the chance to find joy because they are surrounded by adults and community members who are supported, equipped, and empowered.
Supporting survivors of abuse across their lifetime.
My name is Dr. Melissa Curry. I'm a child abuse pediatrician, medical director, and chief of the COSARE for Kids Division of Pediatric Forensic Medicine at University of Louisville School of Medicine. When learning to support individuals with trauma histories, one of the first principles is to practice trauma-informed care, or TIC, with every person, every interaction. Trauma-informed care changes our lens from what's wrong with you to what has happened to you. It reframes our interactions with one another to essentially give one another grace that our behaviors may be a result of a trauma history. In addition to trauma-informed care, which can be practiced with both children and adults, trauma-informed parenting focuses on understanding the impact of trauma on a child's behavior and development and responding with empathy, safety, and support. It's worth mentioning here that parenting doesn't end when our children become adults. The principles of trauma-informed parenting apply to adult children as well. The American Academy of Pediatrics highlights the importance of secure attachment and empathetic caregiving in regulating a child's stress response and promoting resilience. There are 6 main areas to consider with trauma-informed parenting. First is establishing safety and predictability. This includes creating safe physical, emotional spaces for children where they feel secure and protected. Having consistent routines for mornings, meals, bedtime, and other activities helps children feel a sense of control and reduces anxiety. And communicating clearly and calmly. This means using simple, direct language and avoiding raised voices or harsh tones. Second is building trust and connection. This includes validating emotions and helping children name their emotions. Utilizing active listening by paying close attention to what the child is saying with both their words and their body language and other actions. Offering comfort and reassurance by letting the child know they are loved and supported and that their feelings are normal. Third is teaching coping skills. We do this by labeling emotions, but we also do this by helping children learn to problem solve, by encouraging positive self-talk like affirmations, and challenging negative self-talk by asking, what is the evidence that this negative thought or belief is actually true? Fourth is by addressing specific behaviors by understanding their root causes, focusing on positive reinforcement and avoiding punishment, especially physical punishment. Harsh punishments can be re-traumatizing. Focus on understanding the behavior and teaching alternative strategies. Fifth, and this one is very important, emphasizing self-care for caregivers. This includes recognizing the emotional toll that trauma-informed parenting takes on caregivers and seeking support for ourselves to avoid burnout. It also involves practicing self-compassion. Remember our own affirmations that we are doing the best we can, being kind to ourselves, and acknowledging our own needs. And finally, sixth, is collaboration and advocacy. This involves working with professionals and advocating for the child to receive the resources and care that they need and deserve. Another component of trauma-informed parenting that is often not mentioned is the importance of monitoring for trauma symptoms during times of stress, including transitions. This includes times like completing the school year or starting a new school year, adding new family members to the household, or adjusting to older or younger siblings leaving for college or the military. Even after childhood, trauma recovery is a journey that needs ongoing support. For example, adults with childhood trauma histories can have relationship difficulties that include challenges with intimacy, trust, and creating healthy family bonds. There can also be mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder that can impact the ability to provide consistent and nurturing care to our own children when we have trauma histories. One final way to support survivors of trauma is to know where to point someone for more help. You can best help a survivor by offering options and leaving space for them to decide where to go from there. Here are some national resources. These are services that can point someone to more local resources. Trauma-informed care and trauma-informed parenting go a very long way in promoting resilience and healing and helping to prevent the cycle of trauma from perpetuating into our next generations.
Please join the movement. We all have a role to play in keeping kids safe, because every child deserves to grow up healthy, safe, and joyful.